So California is in a Mediterranean climate, and what that translates to is that we don't get rain most of the year except for winter. We just had possibly the last rain event of this year, at least until the end of growing season, and that helped recharge the soil with new water. As the soil soaks up this water, it'll be available for the plant as they start to grow. You can see here a little bit that the buds are starting to swell on this grapevine, and that means that they're ready to push. So as soon as it gets a little bit warmer, you're going to see shoots start sprouting up, and we're going to be able to talk about spring management of vineyards. So it just rained in this vineyard, and that's great because it recharges the soil with water for the coming season. We're very close to bud break, which is where these buds start to grow into leafy shoots, and what we want is the soil to be ready for them. So this rain that just occurred, which may be the last of the year, is really welcome, and we're looking forward to seeing what happens in early spring. Some years, growers won't be lucky enough to have a late season rain event, March, late February, and in that case, recharging the soil has to come from the irrigation lines. This can be expensive and costly, but it is very important to do when the shoots start growing. Young vines or vines that are just pushing new shoots need a lot of water to grow these new tissues that will eventually become the shoots that produce the fruit. In preparation for bud break and spring growth, growers will want to know what nutrients are lacking in their soils. You can do a soil nutrient analysis at a lab, and it'll give you the nutrients that you're lacking or that you have too much of, and that'll help a grower prepare for the coming season. There are many nutrients grapevines need to grow. These are called essential nutrients, and there are a few that are a little bit more prevalent in fertilizers than others. One of the big ones is nitrogen. Nitrogen comes in many forms: nitrate, ammonia, urea, and so on. And it can be applied this time of year for the coming season. So not just with nitrogen, but with all the other nutrients, almost all of the elements come in different forms, different compounds, and you want to make sure you know what percent of that compound is the pure element you want to apply to give your vines the best chance at a good crop for the coming season. Once you have a soil nutrient analysis, a grower will know what nutrients are lacking in the soil. This is really useful because we can amend the soils with fertilizers. And most growers will want to do this before this last rain occurs, because many of the fertilizers that you have should be watered in to the soil. So let's meet back up when these buds start to grow, and we'll talk about early spring vineyard management. At the beginning of spring, you're going to see that your buds have started pushing. This is called bud burst or bud break. And you'll notice that there are more shoots than you planned on when you pruned during the winter. As you can see, there are shoots here that were not meant to be here, and they've come from the actual trunk, not from a spur that you left. These are called suckers. And you want to get rid of these because they'll start taking nutrients and water away from the shoots that you were actually planning on producing fruit with. So what we do is this time of year before they get hard, pop them off with your fingers. You don't need any pruning shears at this point in time. You can just pinch them and twist, and they come right off. And you want to take off as much of it as you can, leaving only the shoots that were left on the spurs or on the canes. So these shoots, the ones that are not meant to be there, they come from latent buds. These are buds that are left in the trunk as the vine is growing and are not selected for growth later on. So they're going to show up year after year, and depending on the vigor of your site and of your vine, you're going to need to remove more or less of them to ensure that the shoots that you did mean to leave get all the nutrients. So these suckers that are left on the vine are often the result of years and years of pruning. They are actually in a lot of the wood from the entirety of the trunk, and every year they're going to pop out. And more or less of them will pop out depending on how vigorous your site and your vine is. If your vine wants to grow more in a vigorous site, you'll have more of these suckers that you have to pull off in the early spring. If the site is less vigorous and the vine is less vigorous, then you'll have less of them. So we're in March right now in 2022 in the North Coast, And you see we had bud break. We're at about 80% bud break in Sonoma County. And if you look at this sucker, which we're supposed to remove, you can see that the little inflorescence on the end, that is what will become a grape cluster. This little one here. And you can see that on each shoot there should be at least one of these if your vine's going to be fruitful for the year. If it has two of them, better on you. So we want to remove these suckers so that they don't take up more of the water and nutrients that we want to go to the shoots that we were supposed to leave for the year. But we don't want to remove them in the early spring when it's still raining, like it is today. The rain will actually increase the chances that spores infect the vine with different fungal or oomycete pathogens, and that can lead to decline of the vineyard over time. So if it's raining, avoid doing this until it stops. So if we think about what we did during winter pruning, we made these cane prunes in some pruning styles, correct? So you can see that the end of this cane has grown about 3 to 4 inches already in late March, and these buds in the middle haven't even pushed yet. And that is a really common thing to happen in any sort of pruning, cane pruning or spur pruning, where the end of the shoots or the end of the spurs will push buds first. This is another reason why we pre-prune in the winter, to avoid frost damage on the buds that we absolutely need to produce crop. So today it's raining out. It's not a good day for pruning, and you shouldn't be pruning in early spring. But buds have broken already, or they've burst, and you can see the shoots behind me are about 3 to 4 inches long already. When we get a rain, especially in the north coast, after bud burst, we have a higher risk of an infection by Phomopsis, which is a leaf or cane spot disease. So Phomopsis is a fungal pathogen, and it's more common in the north coast than a lot of places in California, and it's at higher risk when we have rain after bud break like this. It is a pathogen that causes these spots on the canes and on the leaves, and what that leads to is stunted growth in spring. Could lead to shoot death, spur or death of permanent wood, or could lead to vine death eventually, but that's not as common as the other symptoms we see. And that leads to lower productivity and lower yields for the season. So bud break is an indicator of many things, and one of those is keeping track of powdery mildew. So UCANR IPM, or Integrated Pest Management's website, has a great powdery mildew index calculator and tracker for the season for most of California. And this is really useful because we start keeping track of the powdery mildew index after bud break. So powdery mildew is a really bad thing to have on your grapes in general. They do show up on the leaves, they can show up on the clusters, and if it shows up on the clusters, you start getting decomposition, decay, you can't sell your grapes anymore. It's not a very good thing to have, and it's a fungal pathogen, so be sure to keep track of the powdery mildew index and the risk for powdery mildew infection as the season starts and bud break occurs. So for more information about grapevine powdery mildew, please visit the UCANR IPM page about the grapevine powdery mildew risk assessment index. And this will give you a really good clue of when you should be looking out for grapevine powdery mildew and when you should be spraying, what frequency you should be spraying to prevent spread of powdery mildew in your vineyard. So typically in the start of spring when we have bud break, we want to start monitoring insect pests across the vineyard and making sure they're not getting out of control. There are many insect pests that we should be monitoring, but there's a few key ones that usually are very easy to spot early in the season and help prevent larger problems later in the season when we maintain them and control them early on. One of the more common pests of grapevines are mealybugs. There are 3 varieties in California that are very common. And mealybugs can be found in their juvenile stage early in the spring. One great sign that you have a mealybug or aphid problem, or you will have one during the season, is looking for ants. So ants typically are not found on grapevines unless there is another source of food for them there. Ants will eat the honeydew that comes off of aphids, and they'll actually farm them in some cases. So look for ants in your vineyard. If you see ants climbing up a grapevine, follow them and see where they're going and see if you can find the source of food that they're actually taking from. You might find mealybugs, you might find aphids. Either way, you will find the source of the problem that is to come in the coming season. So leafhoppers are another very common problem in grapevines. They're a vector of several different diseases of grapevines. And leafhoppers should be monitored for at the beginning of the season, either 1 month after bud break or when you see the first larval or nymph stage of the actual leafhopper in the vineyard. Once that's the case, you should be monitoring them, you should be checking them, you should be seeing what you can in the vineyard, looking for the nymph stages, the younger stages, juveniles of the different leafhoppers in your area in the north. So look those up on the UC IPM website and you'll see the different stages of it. I'll also show them to you in this video for a few of them. Very important to know. In California, we have 3 notable leafhoppers that feed on grapes: Virginia creeper leafhopper, western grape leafhopper, and variegated leafhopper. And you can tell the juvenile stages apart by some visual features. However, in the very early stages of growth, these can be difficult to identify accurately. But slightly later in their development, there are markings that can be used to flag which leafhoppers you have in the vineyard. The 4 red markings on the side of juveniles helps identify Virginia creeper leafhopper, while similar yellow markings are present on western grape leafhopper juveniles. Variegated leafhopper juveniles have very distinct red striped coloration on the sides of their bodies. Try to monitor for these in your vineyards, particularly in spring when they're still in a juvenile stage. Catching them early will help reduce adult populations later on and decrease the number of insect disease vectors in your vineyard. So at this time of year, a lot of vineyards remove their cover crop by mowing it, and the cover crop is home to a lot of different insect species, one of which is the Myrridae plant bugs. So the Myrridae plant bugs, they resemble beetles. They're not beetles, but they look like beetles, and they make their home in the cover crop. When you mow it, they are forced to leave and migrate up to the nearby grapevine, and often they'll make their home on the small inflorescence that are immature, the things that will become the clusters later. Now, it looks like quite a big problem. However, they actually have no negative impact as far as we know, so there's no need to control them. After a few days, they're likely to return to the cover crop once it's recovered slightly. If you do see a pest on your grape inflorescence or the immature clusters, again, you can contact your local viticulture advisor or your IPM pest advisor for further information. However, if you do have a Myrridae plant bug, it's not really an issue, and we don't recommend any form of chemical control for such a thing. Myrridae plant bugs come in a myriad of colors, but in Northern California they are often black or green in color. These bugs usually reside in cover crop habitats, but after cover crop is mowed in spring, they can often be found on grape inflorescence due to the loss of their preferred host species. They do not cause damage to the grapes, but growers will want to be sure they are correctly identified for peace of mind. One great way to identify Myrridae plant bugs is the cuneus. The cuneus is a triangular structure at the end of each wing and is often found in Hemiptera insect species. In Myrridae plant bugs, it is turned downward when compared with the rest of the wing. This is a great taxonomic feature to identify Myrridae plant bugs in the vineyard. Another is the piercing sucking mouthparts of Myrridae plant bugs. Because these insects feed on the sap that plants produce, their mouth is designed to penetrate plant tissues to reach the carbohydrate-rich phloem of their host plants. Integrated pest management, or IPM strategies, have been utilized as a means of pest control for decades and focus on identification, monitoring, and controlling pests through multiple management strategies. IPM is a long-term pest control practice that reduces the impact of detrimental pests through management of the ecosystem. Through monitoring and pest identification, IPM can be used to help decide if management is needed and what form of management makes sense. Multiple control methods are incorporated into IPM, such as biological controls, cultural controls, mechanical or physical controls, and chemical controls, with chemical controls typically viewed as a last resort. The key components of IPM are pest identification, monitoring pest populations and damage, guidelines for when management is needed, preventing potential pest problems using a combination of biological, cultural, physical, mechanical, and chemical management tools, and later assessment of the pest management strategy implemented and the impact that it had. University of California Agricultural and Natural Resources has a dedicated IPM website for growers to improve dynamic pest control practices in home and commercial vineyards. It has valuable information and resources to help develop a diversified pest management approach. The Grape Powdery Mildew Risk Assessment Index mentioned earlier in this video can be found on the UC A&R IPM webpage as well. This is a valuable tool for assessing the risk of powdery mildew at a given time of year and for determining if control measures are needed. There's also a year-round IPM program specifically for grapes. The year-round IPM program for wine and raisin grapes is a useful resource for growers to know what pests or pathogens to monitor at any given time of the year. The Grape UC IPM Pest Management Guidelines are also available for free as a PDF file on the UC A&R catalog website. Please refer to the UC IPM resources and contact your local IPM advisor when considering implementing control measures for vineyard pests. That's all for spring management. Please join us later in the season for information on summer management practices and harvest. Thanks for watching.